It's an assessment of sorts, but I know the dailies did point us to some figures already about the National Assembly 2 years on. What do you even think? How would you say they perform if you were to score them? Well, let's head to Abuja to get some perspectives. Okay.
Indeed, I mean, while we're going to be getting perspectives from our guest who's here in the studio this morning, I think it's also very important that we encourage you to say how you're going to rate your representative or your senator at the National Assembly, or in general, how you rate the National Assembly in terms of how they fared so far. Don't forget that I think on Saturday, June the 12th, we'll be celebrating Democracy Day, but on the 11th of June 2019, this National Assembly was inaugurated. Yes, their inauguration is closest now to our new Democracy Day. Before now, we used to celebrate Democracy Day on the 29th of May, which is the swearing in of new officers or new elected officers into office. But now it's moved to the 12th of June every year, and it was seen that the National Assembly has the closest date to that. It's pretty significant because it's supposed to be one of the biggest institutions to celebrate democracy. They make it marked, you know, from an autocracy, so to speak. Well, yes, you've already seen my guest. Is none other than Mr. Clement Wanko, who is the Executive Director of the Policy and Legal Advocacy Center. You're welcome to Sunrise Elite this morning.
Thank you, Mope.
Well, you work very closely with the National Assembly in terms of looking at how they're formulating laws, looking at the kinds of bills that they're formulating as well. But generally, I think normally when people would rate the National Assembly, they'll rate them on representation, on the quality and maybe the quantity of bills that they have been able to formulate, and also on oversight, which is the three major areas that they are supposed to, you know, be there for. From your own assessment, how would you rate this National Assembly 2 years on?
It's a challenge. Challenge because so much has happened. We've gone through like COVID, or we're still in the COVID pandemic era, and that has had its impact on the work that the institutions all over, whether it's the National Assembly or other agencies, have been doing. I think that when you look at what has happened in the last 2 years, the National Assembly has passed 5 laws that have been assented to by the President. This is excluding the budget bills. The Senate has passed 58 bills. The House has passed 74 bills, and there are several other bills in different stages of progression. But the fact that the House has passed 78 and the Senate has 74 and the House Senate has passed 58 does not necessarily translate to anything more than that they have been passed. So the product in that sense of the number of bills passed and assented to so far is just 5, which includes the Companies and Allied Matters Act, the Police Act, the Finance Act, and these are very significant bills. The Onshore, Offshore, Basin Differentiation Act, and so on. So you would say, when you look at the number of bills passed, that not a lot has been passed and assented to by the President. Because at the end of the day, a bill only concludes when it's been assented to by the President. So,
is that also because of the failure of harmonization, or?
Well, you do have both houses passed. For instance, the House has passed 74. The question is, how many has it sent to the Senate for concurrence? The Senate has sent 11 to the House for concurrence, and so it's still at different stages. But the reality is that it's only 5 that have passed. But there are a lot of significant bills in the National Assembly that are awaiting conclusion, and we can talk some more about it, whether it's all of the bills, and several of them are contained therein, dealing with constitutional review, or the much more urgent issue of the Electoral Act that has yet to conclude. All of these are bills that are pending. The petroleum industry bill, these are critical bills that are still pending. So I think when you look at the total number of bills passed and assented to by the President, it's only 5. But when you look at all of the bills in different levels of progression, whether it is first reading, second reading, or awaiting concurrence or assent, you do have almost 2,000 bills in the works in the National Assembly, and that's significant. The question is, when do you move on to the next stages and get as many of those bills as possible and as are reasonable to be passed into law?
To my mind, it's a very big conversation, because when you look at the impact of COVID, which you mentioned in terms of lawmaking, when you look at the fact that in recent times, in terms of representation, the National Assembly has been very concerned about the issue of security. Only recently, the House of Representatives raised the issue and had a summit, it was same on security matters. Many times there have been many conversations around security in the House and also in the Senate as well. So there will be questions in terms of representation, how Nigerians are getting their voices heard, and whether or not with the emergence, especially with how the leadership of this current National Assembly emerged, whether there could be a real check-in of the executive, or even, I mean, there's supposed to be a balance of power amongst the three arms of government, whether or not they have been able to be firm, it would seem, in terms of checking the executive powers as a vibrant arm of government. In your own assessment, how would you rate them?
Well, you did at the beginning mention the three critical roles of the legislature, which is that of lawmaking, oversight, and representation. And in terms of lawmaking, we've already talked about the number of bills pending in National Assembly, the number of bills actually passed and assented to by the President, which is 5. On oversight, I think that there are issues that arise from oversight. The question is, what is the effectiveness of the oversight measures being taken by the National Assembly?
We haven't quite come to oversight, because, I mean, even that is another kettle of fish. There have been things that have come up recently. But in terms of representation, I mean, when you see members oftentimes coming to the floor, raising issues concerning their own constituencies in the House, on the floor of the Senate as well, would you say that they have been vibrant enough in terms of, you know, owning their space as representatives, as true representatives of the people?
I think for a lot of us who have had the experience of watching parliaments walk around the world, but even within Nigeria, you go back to the Second Republic, and we remember with nostalgia the fact that Senate President Joseph Wayas could summon President Shehu Shagari, and when he comes, he will be tame within the National Assembly, which was in Tafawa Balewa Square in Lagos then, and I was a student then. I used to go and watch proceedings, and it was, for me, very exciting watching the power of the legislature. Legislative heads were not, or presiding officers were not chosen through the bully of the executive. Unfortunately, all of those positive aspects of our presidential system seem to be reducing, and you do have a case in Nigeria today that you have the executive interfering in the ability of elected members to choose their presiding officers. And I think when that happens, when the executive bullies and gets its choice of presiding officers, it has its own effect on the boisterousness of the legislature, and that has impact on the ability of the legislature to function. You also have a situation then that when you do have a situation like that, and presiding officers in some ways become gatekeepers for the executive, that has its own challenges. But I think that it is up to the members themselves. Presiding officers and principal officers are chosen by the members, and I think it's up to the members themselves to assert the role that they have to play. The fact that they represent their citizens, they represent their constituents, and they are equals even with their presiding officers. They are the ones that chose one of themselves as equals to become presiding officers. So those who are chosen in that position are not necessarily any more important than the members themselves. But when the members find that they are not getting the support of those that they have put in those positions, then it's up to them to respond as appropriate to the challenges that they are faced with. But yes, constituents are complaining. Constituents do want specific things done. They do want representation in a particular way. And when you look around the country today, you get worried about where the country is descending to. And I think that the challenge for members is to be able to read appropriately what the mood of the nation is and challenge in the National Assembly for government to respond to what the citizens want.
I totally hear you, and I understand what you're trying to say when you say the executive interfered in terms of the emergence of the leadership of the National Assembly. However, those who might be there, or those on the other side will say no, there was no executive interference. There was an interference by the party. Of the ruling party, which produced the leadership and majority members of the National Assembly. Is there a problem with that? Should we differentiate between the party and the executive arm of government?
I think it's important. The party itself has a responsibility to decide who its leadership is in the National Assembly or anywhere else. And I'm speaking in a broad context when I talk about executives seeking to interfere. I think that the party has the right to make a decision about who, if a party is in the majority, who they want to support to emerge. But ultimately, the decision to choose, the decision to vote, is in the hands of those who are elected. And when you look at the voting that is going on, the majority party in legislative houses, and this is beyond the National Assembly, it could be the states as well, the majority party, the members themselves, and it's been something that members of the National Assembly have always tried to assert, that they have the right to make a choice as to who leads them. And those who aspired, even in the 9th Assembly, are people who went to their members, they campaigned, and they jostled and got elected. But my point of view is that you really must have a situation where those decisions are made entirely by the members, no interference from the executive. And I think when that happens, you do have a National Assembly that is well placed, well positioned to carry out the 3 rules outlined for it in the Constitution.
Do you think it has had any effect, though, on their representation, on their power of representation?
Well, the point is that if you do have presiding officers popularly chosen, then the respect is there, and then they also know that they have been voted for by their members, and they have a responsibility to the institution, to their members. And I think that's where the difference is. Where that is not the case, then it becomes a challenge who they feel allegiance to.
Well, I would really love to extend the conversation on representation, especially when you look at the fact that there have been attempts to invite the president over matters of security and legalese. It would seem have stepped in the way, and there have been questions as to why the National Assembly hasn't gone any further in that regard, or even raised any objections to the fact that what they did was a mere invitation. I mean, they were not even well, let's leave that one. Let me move to the area of oversight. You have talked about the effect of COVID-19. That will definitely come to play. But in the area of oversight, where we have seen where committees have now started sitting, oftentimes they go to project site or go to the ministries, departments and agencies that are supposed to be overseen to see how the budget has been spent. We might not be privy to all of that, but when they're invited to the National Assembly, when these people in the different ministries, departments and agencies are invited to the National Assembly, oftentimes the media is invited, and sometimes what we have seen play out on TV screens have not been too pleasant. When you see members more than often now frequently complaining about how people who have been invited from these ministries, departments and agencies are not showing up, although when they do, they come with very little information. Case in point, something that happened recently, I think a member saying that maybe the National Assembly should be shut down because the CBN governor and a number of other people who were invited to their own committee hearing didn't show up. What are your thoughts in terms of the powers of the National Assembly to oversight? Do you think that those powers are respected, or are those powers being overlooked?
I think it's two things. One, the National Assembly itself needs to organize and structure itself to be able to ensure that you do not have too much invitation to members of the executive. And we've had a situation where you have, whether it's a civilian governor or indeed any other person, sometimes they get invited by different committees at different times and they have to show up. And so when it gets so frequent, it becomes in some ways difficult to be managed by the executive. But beyond that, the powers of the National Assembly to summon a public official or a person who has use of the public purse is overwhelming. It's stated in the Constitution, and I think it's something that the National Assembly needs to fine-tune its oversight hearings to be able to have it strategically and well organized to get the best results. But the executive always has to have a responsibility of responding to invitations by the National Assembly. And I would think, for instance, even the president, it would be a wonderful opportunity to go to the National Assembly to speak to the people's representatives and say, this is the work that we have done. These are the achievements we have made. What are your concerns? These are explanations over your concerns. That's the whole purpose of these oversight hearings. And I think that the executive fails to take advantage of this a lot of times, and it creates the friction that it creates. I think that if there are concerns within the executive about being invited so many times, they need to work out with the National Assembly the best way to get the best results from inviting people to come to oversight hearings in the National Assembly.
As we wind down now, questions have already been raised on the Senate's power of scrutiny, it would seem, especially with regards to appointment and, with regards to appointment. Only recently, I think yesterday, the Senate President did read that the President's letter to screen INEC commissioners, and controversy has emerged over the appointment of one of the commissioners who is obviously one of the President's aide. I don't know what your thoughts are with regards to that, because there have been increasing questions as to the thoroughness of the Senate scrutiny of people who have been appointed by the President.
I think that always, especially with INEC and such other independent bodies, the need for nominees to be not just non-partisan, but to be perceived as not being partisan is so very important. And I think it's a big mistake to nominate someone who is a presidential aide, especially even handling political matters or to try to nominate such a person into INEC. It would be something that I hope that the INEC committee in the Senate that has this responsibility, and I did listen to Senator Kabiru Gaya yesterday evening speaking about this as well. I think that it's something that I hope the committee understands the need to ensure that the Electoral Commission has non-partisan persons in it. And I know that the committee is one of the most productive, very excellent committee, and I know that the chairman and members of the committee are going to be very conscious of this.
Should they have come up at all? I mean,
certainly, I think that nominating an aide of the president or indeed a political actor into the commission is unacceptable, and my hope is that the Senate understands that the sanctity and independence of the Electoral Commission needs to be protected.
Well, Mr. Clement Wankwo, we have to thank you for your time. As I said, it's a big conversation, can be finished in one sitting, and I believe it's something that is definitely ongoing. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts, Joe, on this particular matter. 2 years of the National Assembly in session. What are your thoughts in terms of how that has fed? But thank you so much.
Thank you,
Mr. Clement Wankwo is the Executive Director of Policy and Legal Advocacy Center.